writer and creator and figure in the Star Trek community. DC Fontana passed away. She was a writer who worked on a lot of very, very influential episodes, and I thought we talk about some. So if you'll pull up let me share my screen again because my share screen went away on my machine crash. If you'll share my screen, I've got pulled up off of StarTrek.com. They've got a very nice, coverage here about DC Fontana passing away. But this is the one I thought would be interesting to talk about because, her role in helping shape the Star Trek universe is pretty great and pretty amazing. So we've got 6 iconic Star Trek episodes by DC Fontana.
So it is.
Yep. She's just right there. And then right here, the first one is Journey to Babel or Babel. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I always say Babel.
I've always heard Babel. I don't know why.
It's funny.
But this is a very, very important episode for Star Trek fans. This gives us, of course, Amanda, Star Trek's human mother. We get Sarek, which is Spock's human father. Did I just flub something there? Let me take that back. We get Amanda, which is Spock's human mother. And, of course, we have Sarek, which is Spock's, obviously, Vulcan father. And in the episode, it's very interesting. They talk about this actually in the coverage for this. I was going to bring it up anyway. It's interesting how Amanda very much represents his human emotional side, and then Sarek represents his Vulcan, logical side. And you see the two of them kind of coming together, and you see Spock standing there in the middle, where he's got to choose, which is going to win out over his emotional side or his logical side.
That's a great image, actually. This picture is a great image just to kind of sum up the spirit of the episode and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and it's just very. But that's a very, very important episode for Star Trek fans and a very, very rewatchable one. They mentioned that in the thing, but yeah, it's very rewatchable. I didn't realize she wrote or contributed to Ultimate Computer. I don't know why.
Not either.
Yeah, but of course, this episode is where they take an AI and basically put it in command of the Enterprise, and the AI goes rogue, as most AI tends to do in fiction, and they end up attacking a bunch of Federation starships and disabling and killing a bunch of people. But it's a cautionary tale about AI versus humans and who should be in ultimate command and control to make the final decision. But it's a great episode. These are all classic. That's the other thing too. These are all classic Star Trek episodes. They're not great. They are classic Star Trek episodes.
I always think it's also interesting the Doctor character that created the computer.
Yeah.
And what a sort of flawed and tragic character he is.
Oh yeah.
And I've always thought that episode was just really, really amazing. And quite frankly, I don't know if the way they did it, you could ever do it again. Right. Because there are things they did in that episode I don't think you can do right now in the current political climate and things like that. But that character is so tragic, and the actor is really, really, really good. A really good actor with I think kind of like a Shakespearean background. So he has this great eloquent voice and everything. He really comes across as this very intelligent, very driven, but kind of mad scientist, Yeah. And that's a great episode. Great cautionary tale of the hubris of man. As much as it is man against machine, it's also about the hubris of man. So
very true, very true. So Ultimate Computer, which again I was surprised. I didn't realize that she actually had written that one. This is another one I was surprised. The Enterprise incident. I was like, she worked on that one too. I had no idea. I've always loved this episode. In this one, Kirk appears to go mad and takes the Enterprise into the neutral zone or whatever into Romulan space, and of course they get captured. And it looks like they're going to execute Kirk. And then he turns up later in the episode, and he's had an operation, and he is undercover, and he's running around, and they're trying to steal this new prototype cloaking device because the Federation wants to figure out how it works. It's very much a sort of like one of those, Cold War. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah. It's a classic
technology
episode.
spy.
Classic
Oh
episode.
yeah.
And again, it's another great Spock episode. People in the tributes I've seen, they talk about all the contributions she made to the Vulcan culture and Spock in
Oh yeah.
particular and everything like that. And this is also a very big Spock episode.
And it's interesting too because this is one of the first times, I think they mentioned this in the coverage, but I remember even as a kid, this is one of the first times I saw a female commander, because the Romulan commander is a woman.
Right.
And she's very powerful and she's very much in charge. And I remember even as a kid, I didn't question it too much, but at the same point, I imagine it was very groundbreaking in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
But another classic.
But the funny thing is, I don't remember questioning it at all as a kid. As a kid, I don't remember it being weird to me or anything like that. I was just like, "Oh, cool character."
I didn't either.
Interesting.
But as you get older,
she digs Spock. You know,
yeah,
the unattainable man. I've always kind of liked that. You know, so
yeah. And then this is a very interesting one here to include, of course, Yesteryear from Star Trek: The Animated series, and this one is a great story, but it also introduces a lot of interesting elements that we see later. They actually used the look of Vulcan from Yesteryear for Enterprise. They patterned a lot of how Vulcan looks in Enterprise off of what they did actually in Yesteryear. And then also too, I think this is the first time that I think it's the Celot, the Spock describes it as the teddy bear with fangs. The first time we see that is actually in Yesteryear, the animated series.
Yeah, it's like a giant battle cat type thing, right?
Yeah. And very seriously, like even if you don't find yourself, you think you'd be too terribly interested in watching a lot of the animated Star Trek show, it's worth watching at least Yesteryear, because it is a great episode. And this, of course, was written by D.C. Fontana. So
yeah, anytime people talk about, the animated series and some of the controversies or anything like that, because of course Gene Roddenberry himself kind of disavowed the animated series, which I think is a real shame, because I think the animated series is actually really good in its own right, and it is a product of its time, but still I think it's really good. But in reviews they always talk about that this episode stands out, and that it's still regarded as something that's important for canon and things like that.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because I know from having read a lot about the Star Trek animated series, they intended this to very much be like the next season of Star Trek. Like if they were still filming, that this would be the next season. And they got pretty much almost the entire original cast to come back to reprise their roles. I used to always have it on in the studio, and when it came out on DVD, I bought it. And I would always have the episodes playing in the studio when I was in my studio working. And I would just have it on because it's so great, because it's like this really awesome, like Star Trek, like radio play or radio drama, because all the actors are there,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's a lot of fun. So, but this is definitely one that's worth a watch. And then here's a big one: Encounter at Farpoint. I've heard a lot of different reflections and stories on her role in Encounter at Farpoint, but this is such an important episode for Star Trek and Next Gen fans. So much of what we would eventually go on to explore and love about Star Trek: The Next Generation actually starts with this episode, and also, of course, the introduction of Q. I mean, Encounter at Farpoint is again another classic Star Trek episode.
It's very important. I mean, this is what launched the Next Generation. And even though I know it's kind of the standard deal today to bemoan or to criticize the first generation of Star Trek: The Next Generation, or the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, I'm not one of those people. And even if you acknowledge that or give that to somebody, I still have to say Encounter at Farpoint was a good introduction to the characters, because I think most of the primary elements were there. And it's interesting, we've talked about this before, but if you want some great insight about this episode and some controversy, some gossip, if you will, watch William Shatner's documentary Chaos on the Bridge, because he did interview DC Fontana.
Yeah.
And she made some interesting remarks that I very much disagree with, that I think that she kind of missed the mark a little bit. So, and that's all I'm going to say, because you can go see it yourself. And of course, we want to celebrate her life and all that kind of stuff and her contribution. So I don't want to be overly critical, but just it's her talking. So it's straight from her mouth, and she can give you her insights. If you haven't seen that, I do recommend it to people that are interested in that dynamic, because this is one of the few episodes also that from Next Generation that Gene Roddenberry had a writing credit on.
Right,
and
right.
there is a lot. There was a very interesting dynamic between the two of them. So let's leave it at that, right? So
that's best. But no, but again, if you want to check out this article, it is on StarTrek.com, and again, it's 6 iconic Star Trek episodes by DC Fontana. Again, we want to obviously, I'm not a very religious person. I was when I was younger. I'm not much of a religious person now, but definitely want to, obviously, say I hope our thoughts and everything are obviously with her family and everyone in their time of grief and grieving, and but it is really worthwhile to take some time and celebrate, especially for us Star Trek fans, the huge contributions that she made to the Star Trek universe. And then also, of course, she wrote several of the Star Trek novels, which are quite highly thought of and enjoyed and celebrated. So we just want to take a moment and reflect upon her contributions. And if there is an afterlife, say thank you. But I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about DC Fontana and all the amazing work that she did, specifically with Star Trek. So now she also, too, just briefly, she also had some interesting writing credits, a lot of other things that I imagine people are not talking about, like $6 Million Man, the Logan's Run TV series, Land of the Lost. She worked on a ton of stuff, Bonanza. She's she had a huge role in shaping a lot of television for a lot of those of us that grew up in that era, too.
And she did write a Deep Space Nine episode as well, or at least was one of the writers on a Deep Space Nine episode. It was one of the first ones to deal with the Trill. It was a very difficult episode because if anybody knows,
I think it's in this list. I missed it. My bad. It's in the list.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
so
Dax.
Dax. One of the interesting things about this episode is that, of course, the whole idea of the Trill evolved. They were first presented in Next Generation, and they were a lot different than what they ended up being in Deep Space Nine. And in the first 2 seasons or so, you can kind of feel the writers struggling with this. And I heard that DC Fontana struggled with this a lot because people didn't really quite understand the nature of the Trill very well, because they had established something not completely different, but they were in the original version, they were much more sort of a parasite that took over their host, and the host was meaningless. That's the way it was presented in Next Generation. And in Deep Space Nine, they wanted to go more with the symbiote idea, that this is a unique, different person. And she was the first person, as I understand, that had to tackle this transition specifically. And my understanding was she wasn't given a whole lot of information, and it was a real struggle to figure this out, because, like I said, the whole Trill idea evolved over time from the way it was presented in Next Generation to the way it ultimately ended up in Deep Space Nine. So
right.
My understanding was it was a very difficult episode to write.
So for the listeners or the viewers at home, you're going to have to ponder if I made that mistake on purpose or if it was truly accidental. Maybe I wanted to put more highlight on this episode. But anyhow, she did have a hand in shaping almost every single iteration of Star Trek. And it's interesting, too, because in a weird way, when you think of Enterprise, it's interesting how something she created for the animated series, carried over into a completely another version. It's interesting how it all kind of, if you contribute something great to the Star Trek universe, it can always come back and add, some extra backstory or tapestry or flavor to something that, otherwise would just be something they would design, and put together. But it's interesting how they were able to call back to something like that. So it's very interesting. And again, we just want to take some time and celebrate her contributions to Star Trek.
And I do want to mention there are a lot of fans, myself included, that do think of DC Fontana as one of the creators of Star Trek, even though it does only have Gene Roddenberry's name in the credits for the created by. A lot of people think her name should be up there as well, along with a couple of other people. So that's how big her contribution is, and how valued she is by many of the fans.
Very cool. All right, so we just wanted to take some time and celebrate her work and talk about DC Fontana. So for our